A little girl begged a lone biker, unleashing a chain of events that forced a retired legend to confront his violent past. To protect them, he must become the monster he tried to bury, risking everything for a second chance at life. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The old bike engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the quiet of Daniel's garage. The scent of oil and gasoline was his perfume, the weight of a wrench in his hand, his only comfort. This was his peace, bought with blood and paid for with silence. Then the world broke in. "Mister, please, mister, you got to help." The voice was a thin, reedy thing, shredded by panic. Daniel straightened up, his back groaning in protest, a chronic reminder of years spent hunched over handlebars and in brawls. A little girl, no more than 7, stood trembling in the open doorway of his shop, her face a mess of tears and dirt, her tiny fists clenched at her sides. He sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet air. "What is it, kid? You lost?" "It's my mama," she sobbed, rushing forward to clutch at his grease-stained jeans. Her touch was a brand. "There are bad men. They're beating my mama. In our house. Please, you gotta come." Daniel's heart, a stone he'd carefully placed over the pit of his past, didn't so much as flutter. This was town business, sheriff business. Not his, not anymore. He was Daniel Miller now, a mechanic. He wasn't Doc anymore, the man who could end an argument with a look and a life with a twist of his hands. "You need to run to the police station, kid. Tell Deputy Mark," he said, his voice deliberately flat. He tried to gently pry her fingers from his leg, but she held on with a desperate strength. "No time," she wailed, her huge blue eyes drowning in fresh tears. "They'll hurt her real bad. You're the only one. You look strong." The irony was a knife in his gut. He looked strong. He was a hollowed-out shell, a fortress with the garrison long gone. He looked out the door, down the sleepy main street of Cedar Creek. A perfect quiet town for a perfect quiet death. That was the deal. That was the peace. "Please, mister," the little girl whispered, her voice breaking. "She's all I got. Her name is Elena." Elena. The name meant nothing to him, and yet everything. This was a complication, a messy human complication that could unravel the fragile fiction of his life. Helping meant stepping back into the light, and the light would show everyone exactly what he was. But then he looked down at the girl. Lucy, he realized she'd said her name was Lucy, and saw the absolute, world-ending terror in her eyes. It was a look he'd seen before, in the mirror, a lifetime ago. "Damn it," he breathed, the words a surrender. He didn't grab a gun. He didn't need one. His hands were weapons enough. He just strode out of the garage, Lucy's small hand clutching his, her little legs struggling to keep up with his long, determined strides. He was a storm cloud moving down a sunny street, a ghost putting on its old armor. He didn't run. Men who ran looked guilty. Men who ran attracted attention. Daniel walked with a purpose that made people instinctively step aside. He followed Lucy's frantic tugs around a corner, down a lane, to a modest, slightly run-down cottage with a neat little garden. The front door was splintered, hanging askew on its hinges. From inside, he could hear the sickening thuds of blows and a woman's choked cries. "Stay here," he commanded Lucy, his voice low and leaving no room for argument. He pointed to a large oak tree in the yard. "Behind that tree. Don't move. Don't make a sound." She nodded, her eyes wide, and scurried to hide. Daniel stepped through the ruined doorway, and time folded in on itself. The quiet of the cottage was a lie, broken by grunts and the sharp, wet sound of a fist meeting flesh. The air was thick with the smell of cheap cologne and fear. 2 men, big, meaty, dressed in tracksuits, the uniform of low-level muscle. They had a woman cornered in the kitchen, Elena. She was curled on the linoleum floor, arms wrapped around her head, her dark hair matted with blood. One of the men, a brute with a shaved head, was kicking her in the ribs while the other, younger and weaselly, watched with a vacant smile. "That's enough," Daniel said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the violence like a blade. The two men spun around, startled. The bald one, the leader, recovered quickly, his face twisting into a sneer. "Who the hell are you? Get lost. This is a private conversation." "The conversation's over," Daniel said, his hands hanging loose at his sides. His gaze was calm, empty, a predator's gaze. "Leave the woman. Walk out of here." The weaselly one laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Or what, old man?" Daniel didn't answer with words. He took a step forward. It was just a step, but it carried the weight of 100 dark nights and 1,000 silenced warnings. The atmosphere in the room shifted, grew cold and heavy. The bald thug's sneer wavered. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of men who didn't care if they lived or died, men who were already dead inside. "You don't know who you're messing with," the bald man blustered, pulling a switchblade from his pocket. The click of the blade locking into place was a definitive sound in the tense silence. It was the wrong move. The knife meant this was no longer a negotiation. It was a statement of intent, and Daniel was fluent in that language. What happened next was a blur of brutal, terrifying efficiency. Daniel didn't flinch. He moved inside the arc of the blade, his left hand deflecting the thrust, while his right, hardened by decades of work, drove into the man's throat. It wasn't a punch, it was a strike, a precise crippling blow. The thug dropped, gagging, his eyes bulging as he clawed at his crushed windpipe, the knife clattering to the floor. The weaselly man stared, his jaw slack with shock. He fumbled for something in his waistband, but Daniel was already on him. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it at an impossible angle, until the bone snapped with a dry crack. The man screamed, a high-pitched shriek of agony, but it was cut short as Daniel's forehead smashed into his nose, flattening it in a burst of blood and cartilage. The man crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Two men neutralized, no wasted motion, no emotion, just the cold, hard calculus of violence. Daniel stood amidst the wreckage, his breathing even. He looked down at the two broken bodies, a familiar numbness settling over him. This was the man he was. This was the man he'd promised to bury, and he'd just dug him up for a woman he didn't know. He turned his attention to Elena. She was pushing herself up onto her elbows, her body trembling violently. Her face was a mask of bruises and blood, one eye already swelling shut. But the other eye, a startling shade of green, was wide open, fixed on him. There was no relief in it yet, only a fresh, primal fear. She had just traded one kind of monster for another. "Lucy," she croaked, her voice raw. "She's safe," Daniel said, his own voice rough. He knelt, keeping his distance, not wanting to frighten her further. "She's outside." Tears welled in Elena's good eye, cutting clean paths through the blood on her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. Just then, a siren wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer. Of course, a neighbor must have called. The peaceful facade of Cedar Creek was reasserting itself. Daniel stood. His part was done. He had to go. To be questioned, to be seen, to be put in a system. It was all a risk he couldn't take. "The police are here," he said. "They'll help you." He turned to leave, stepping over the moaning bald man. "Wait," Elena called out, her voice stronger. "Your name. Please, what's your name?" He paused at the shattered doorway, the light from outside framing his broad, retreating back. He didn't look back. "Daniel," he said. And then he was gone, melting out the back way just as Deputy Mark's cruiser skidded to a halt out front, his retreat as silent and final as a closing tomb. He found Lucy hiding exactly where he'd left her. She launched herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his legs in a fierce hug. "Is Mama okay?" "She will be," he said, gently extracting himself. "The police are with her now. You can go to her." He walked away, back towards his garage, back towards his silence, but he could still feel the phantom grip of her small hand in his, and the searing, terrified gaze of her mother's green eye. The quiet of his life was now a loud, accusing thing. Back in the ruined cottage, Deputy Mark Callahan, a decent man in a crisp uniform, helped Elena to her feet while his partner checked the pulses of the two incapacitated thugs. "Jesus, Elena," Mark said, his voice tight with concern. "Who were these guys? And who did this to them?" Elena accepted a blanket he offered, wrapping it around her shaking shoulders. She looked at the two broken men, one choking on his own blood, the other with a face that was no longer a face. The violence had been so absolute, so professional. "A man," she whispered, her gaze drifting to the empty doorway. "A man named Daniel." Mark followed her gaze, a deep frown on his face. "Daniel Miller, the mechanic?" He shook his head in disbelief. "I've known Dan for years. He's the quietest guy in town. He did this?" Elena didn't answer. She just hugged the blanket tighter. The image of the stranger's cold, empty eyes burned into her memory. Quiet, yes, but not peaceful. There was a world of difference, and she had just seen it. Later that night, the silence in Daniel's small apartment above the garage was deafening. He poured 3 fingers of cheap whiskey into a glass and downed it, the burn doing nothing to scour away the feeling. The phone on his wall, a relic, rang, its jangle unnaturally loud. He stared at it. Only one person had that number. It was a line to the past, a line he was never supposed to use. He picked it up on the 4th ring. "Yeah," a gravelly, familiar voice came down the line, laced with a dark amusement. "Doc, heard you had a busy afternoon." Daniel closed his eyes. So they knew. Of course they knew. The world he'd left behind had long, unforgiving arms. "It was nothing, Paul," Daniel said, his voice flat. "Nothing?" Paul, his old sergeant-at-arms, his brother, chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "2 of Jimmy the Weasel Falco's boys get turned into scrap metal in some backwater town, and the word on the street is it was the work of an old man. An old man with very particular skills. Sounds like the kind of nothing that gets people like us noticed." Daniel's grip tightened on the receiver. Jimmy Falco, a small-time, ambitious drug dealer from the next county over. A pest, but a pest with connections. "The woman they were beating," Paul continued, his tone shifting, becoming serious. "She's into Falco for 20 grand, a debt left by her deadbeat husband. Falco's pride is hurt now, Doc. He can't let that slide. He'll be back, and he'll be looking for you." "Let him look," Daniel growled. "That's the spirit I remember," Paul said, a hint of pride in his voice. "But listen, brother. The club. We've got a truce with Falco's people, an understanding. We can't get involved. You're on your own on this one. Officially." Daniel knew what that meant. Unofficially, Paul would be watching. But the club, his old family, would not be riding to his rescue. The peace he had bought was conditional on his disappearance. By stepping back into the light, he had voided the warranty. "I didn't ask for your help," Daniel said, and hung up. He poured another whiskey. He was on his own. Just him, a terrified woman, her little girl, and a pack of wolves who now knew there was a sheepdog in their midst. He looked at his hands, the knuckles scarred and calloused. They were trembling slightly, not from fear, from anticipation. The monster was awake, and it was hungry. The next morning, there was a soft knock on his garage door. He knew who it was before he even opened it. Elena stood there, Lucy peeking out from behind her legs. In the daylight, her bruises were a lurid palette of purple and yellow. But she had cleaned up, and the fierce green of her eyes was even more striking. She held a small paper plate covered in foil. I baked you some muffins," she said, her voice still a little hoarse. She thrust the plate towards him. "It's not much, but thank you for what you did." Daniel stared at the offering. It was so normal, so civilian. He took it awkwardly. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she said, her gaze steady. "Deputy Mark told me. He told me those men work for a dangerous person. He said they might come back." Her courage wavered for a second, fear flickering in her eyes. "He said you might be the only one who isn't afraid of him." Daniel looked from her terrified face to Lucy's hopeful one. He saw the life he had built, fragile as a soap bubble, ready to pop. He could shut the door, tell her it wasn't his problem. Go back to his oil and his silence. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But then he thought of Paul's call, Jimmy Falco's wounded pride. They would be back. They would hurt Elena. They would terrify Lucy, and they would burn his quiet life to the ground anyway. Running was no longer an option. The only way out was through. He let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man accepting his fate. "You and Lucy," he said, his voice low. "You can't stay at your house. It's not safe." Elena's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I know, but I have nowhere else to go. I used my last bit of money for this month's rent." Daniel made a decision. It was foolish, reckless, and went against every instinct of self-preservation he had left. "There's a room," he said, gesturing with his thumb towards the stairs leading to his apartment. "It's small, nothing fancy, but the lock on the door is solid. You can stay here until this is over." The shock on Elena's face was palpable. "Here? With you? I couldn't possibly—" "It's not an invitation," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's a tactical decision. I can't protect you if you're across town." The word protect hung in the air between them, a promise and a threat. Elena searched his face, looking for the monster from yesterday, but all she saw was a weary, resolute man. A man who had just offered her his last shred of peace. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you, Daniel." And so the fortress of his solitude was breached. The quiet garage now held the sound of a little girl's laughter as she played with an old set of spark plugs, and the scent of Elena's shampoo mingled with the smell of motor oil. It was a jarring, dissonant symphony. Later, while Lucy was napping on his couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of him, Elena found him at his workbench, cleaning a carburetor with a focus that was almost religious. "The debt," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "It's $20,000. My husband, David, he had a problem. Gambling. He owed money to the wrong people. Then he drove his car off a bridge." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I thought his death cleared the debt. I was naive." Daniel didn't look up from his work. "It never does." "I can't pay it, Daniel. I'm a waitress at the diner. I can barely pay for Lucy's school clothes." "I know," he said. He did know. He knew how the Jimmy Falcos of the world worked. They fed on desperation. The debt was just the excuse. The real goal was domination, was making an example. Elena was the example. That evening, the fragile domesticity was shattered by the roar of motorcycle engines. Not one, but three. They pulled up in front of the garage, the sound echoing off the buildings. Daniel was on his feet instantly, a cold stillness settling over him. He moved to the door, Elena close behind him, her breath catching in her throat. Three men, clad in the familiar leather and denim of the Hells Angels, dismounted. But they weren't from his old chapter. These were younger, their cuts looking new, their eyes full of a swagger they hadn't yet earned. The leader, a man with a jaw like granite and cold eyes, took off his helmet. "Looking for a man called Doc," he said, his voice a low rumble. Daniel stood in the doorway, blocking the view inside. "You found him." The man's eyes flickered over Daniel, assessing, and a slow, respectful nod followed. "I'm Marcus, president of the Cedar Spires chapter. We heard you had some trouble with Jimmy Falco." News traveled fast. Daniel just waited. "We've got a message from the Mother chapter," Marcus continued. "From Paul. He says to tell you that while the club can't officially be involved, that doesn't mean we can't keep an eye on the perimeter. Unofficially." He glanced past Daniel, his gaze lingering on Elena for a moment before returning to Daniel. "Falco's got men watching the roads into town. 2 cars. They're making a list of everyone who comes to see you." It was a warning, a courtesy, a show of respect from one warrior to another. The old bonds, though strained, were not completely broken. "I appreciate the intel," Daniel said, his voice neutral. Marcus nodded again. "We'll be around." He put his helmet back on, and with a thunderous roar, the 3 bikers turned and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a profound silence in their wake. Elena stared at Daniel, her face pale. "Who are you, Daniel?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Really?" He finally turned to look at her, the setting sun casting long shadows across his face. The quiet mechanic was gone, replaced by the legend, by Doc. "I'm the man who's going to end this," he said. And in those words she heard the echo of the violence he had unleashed in her kitchen, and she knew with a chilling certainty that he would, one way or another. The game was on. The hunter was now the protector, and the quiet town of Cedar Creek was about to become a battlefield. The silence after the bikes faded was heavier than the engine noise had been. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Daniel's back. The man who fixed her sink last week, who always paid for his coffee with exact change, had just been addressed with the reverence of a warlord. "Who are you?" The question was a breath, barely audible. Daniel didn't turn. His gaze was fixed on the empty street, watching the dust settle. "I told you, Daniel. That's not an answer." She hugged herself, the chill of the evening seeping through her thin sweater. "Doc? They looked at you like you were their king." He finally turned, and the setting sun carved his face into a mask of sharp angles and deep shadows. The gentle, weary mechanic was gone. In his place was the man from her kitchen, the man with the empty eyes. "The less you know, the safer you are. Get Lucy. We're moving you upstairs. Now." His tone brooked no argument. It was the voice of command, a voice used to being obeyed without question. Elena found herself moving, gathering a drowsy Lucy from the couch, her mind reeling. Upstairs, his apartment was a monk's cell, a worn sofa, a small table, a bed visible through an open door, neatly made. The only personal touch was a single framed black and white photograph on the wall of a much younger Daniel, surrounded by a sea of leather-clad men on a row of gleaming motorcycles. He looked straight at the camera, a faint, dangerous smile on his lips, utterly fearless. He saw her looking and quickly closed the bedroom door. "You and Lucy take the bed. I'll be out here." "Daniel, we can't take your bed." "You will," he said, his voice final. He tossed her a set of keys. "Deadbolt. Chain. Don't open it for anyone but me." He paused, his jaw tight. "And if you hear trouble, there's a fire escape through the bedroom window. You take Lucy and you run. You don't look back. You understand?" The instructions were so cold, so precise. He was preparing for a siege. Elena could only nod, her throat too tight for words. Later, after she'd tucked a sleeping Lucy into his bed, the sheets smelling faintly of him, of soap and motor oil, she crept back out. He was standing by the window, peering through a slit in the blinds, a silhouette against the neon sign from the bar across the street. "Can't you just go to the police?" she whispered. A dry, humorless laugh escaped him. "Mark's a good man, but he writes tickets and breaks up bar fights. The men Falco will send aren't the kind you arrest. They're the kind you bury." He glanced at her. "The police will just get in the way, or get hurt. So, what? We just wait for them to come?" "No," he said, his voice low and deadly. "I'm not waiting." He moved away from the window and picked up the landline phone, dialing a number from memory. "Paul," he said when the line connected. "I need a name. The crew Falco has watching the town. Who's leading them?" There was a pause on the other end. Elena could hear the faint, gruff reply, but not the words. "Rico," Daniel repeated, committing it to memory. "And where are they drinking?" Another pause. Daniel's eyes met Elena's across the dark room. They were like chips of flint. "The Roadhouse. Good." He hung up. "What are you going to do?" Elena asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm going to talk to them," he said, walking to a locked metal cabinet in the corner. He produced a key and opened it. Inside, neatly organized, were tools, but not mechanics' tools. There were weighted leather saps, a telescoping steel baton, and a cleaned and oiled Colt 1911 pistol. He ignored the gun, picking up the baton and slipping it into the inside pocket of his leather jacket. It was a movement so practiced, so natural, it made Elena's blood run cold. "Talking?" she challenged, her voice trembling. He turned to her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, not coldness, but a grim, inevitable resolve. "It's a conversation, Elena. I'm just going to make sure they understand my point of view." He moved towards the door. "Daniel, wait." He stopped, his hand on the knob. She didn't know what to say. "Don't go. Be careful." The words felt foolish, inadequate for the darkness he was walking into. Instead, she crossed the room, stood on her toes, and pressed a quick, fierce kiss to his stubbled cheek. It was an impulse, a jolt of connection that surprised them both. He went perfectly still. The scent of her, of fear and faint perfume, filled his senses. He could feel the warmth of her skin against his, a shocking contrast to the cold metal of the baton in his pocket. He didn't look at her. He just gave a curt nod, and then he was gone, the door closing with a soft, definitive click. The Roadhouse was exactly what the name implied, a low-slung, windowless bar on the edge of town, a place where the beer was cheap and the questions were cheaper. Daniel's truck pulled into the gravel lot, parking away from the glow of the streetlights. He sat for a moment, listening to the twang of a country song leaking from inside. This was the borderland between his old life and his new one. He got out, the gravel crunching under his boots. He didn't slink or sneak. He walked to the entrance with the rolling, confident gait of a man who owned the ground he walked on. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of spilled beer. A few locals glanced up, their eyes widening in recognition and fear. They knew the quiet mechanic, but the man who walked in tonight wasn't him. His gaze swept the room, instantly cataloging the threats. And there they were, 3 of them, clustered around a pool table. They had the look, expensive watches, sharp clothes that tried too hard, the casual arrogance of men who thought their boss's reputation was a suit of armor. The one leaning on his pool cue, a man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, had to be Rico. Daniel walked straight towards them. The music seemed to fade, the chatter dying down as the room sensed the shift in atmosphere. Rico looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Help you, old-timer?" Daniel stopped a few feet away, his hands loose at his sides. "You're Rico. You work for Jimmy Falco." The smirk vanished. Rico straightened up, his 2 companions moving to flank him. "Who's asking?" "The woman you were beating yesterday," Daniel said, his voice conversational, yet it carried to every corner of the silent bar. "The little girl you terrified. They're under my protection now." Rico laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Your protection? And who the hell are you?" Daniel took 1 step forward. It was a small movement, but it brought him deep into their personal space, an act of pure dominance. "I'm the reason your 2 friends are in the hospital," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And I'm the man who's telling you to get in your cars, drive back to Falco, and tell him the debt is cancelled. Tell him that if he or any of his men set foot in this town again, I will not be sending them back to him. I will be sending him pieces of them." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the threat left Rico speechless for a moment. Then his face contorted with rage. "You got a death wish, you old fool? It happened in a heartbeat." Rico made a move, a quick, practiced reach for the small of his back. He never finished it. Daniel's hand was a blur. The steel baton was in his grip, and with a sharp, metallic schnick, he extended it and, in the same motion, drove the weighted end into Rico's shoulder. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Rico screamed, collapsing to his knees, his arm hanging uselessly. One of the other men lunged. Daniel pivoted, the baton whipping through the air and cracking against the man's knee. He went down with a choked cry. The third man froze, his eyes wide with terror, his hands held up in surrender. The entire fight had lasted less than 3 seconds. Daniel stood over the moaning Rico, his breathing still even. He leaned down, his voice cold and flat. The message, deliver it. He didn't wait for a response. He retracted the baton, slipped it back into his jacket, and turned. He walked out of the bar the same way he'd walked in, slow, deliberate, and utterly untouchable. The silence he left behind was louder than any explosion. Back at the apartment, Elena was pacing. Every second felt like an hour. Then she heard the key in the lock. She spun around as Daniel walked in. He looked the same. No blood, no bruises, his jacket zipped up. But his eyes were the eyes of Doc. The ghost of violence clung to him like a mist. "What happened?" she breathed. "They understood the situation," he said, his voice rough. He walked to the sink and poured a glass of water, his hand perfectly steady. She stared at him, this enigma of a man who could bake a frozen pizza for her daughter with a quiet smile and then go out and break bones with terrifying efficiency. The fear she felt was now laced with something else, something dangerous and compelling. A raw, primal attraction to the absolute certainty of him. He caught her looking, and for a long moment, they just held each other's gaze across the small, dimly lit room. The charged space between them crackled with everything that had happened, everything that was unsaid. He had fought for her. He had drawn a line in the sand with blood and broken bones. He was her protector, and she was terrified to realize she was falling for the monster. The charged silence in the apartment was shattered by the sound of a car engine gunning too fast down the quiet street, followed by the shatter of glass. Daniel was at the window in an instant, peering through the blinds. A bottle of gasoline, a rag stuffed in its neck, lay smashed and burning on the asphalt in front of his garage. A message, a cheap, cowardly message. "They know where we are," Elena whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," Daniel said, his voice dangerously calm. "They know where I work. They're probing, seeing how I'll react." He let the blinds fall back into place. "They won't come for the apartment. Not yet. They'll want to draw me out first." He turned to face her. The dim light from the street lamp outside carved the planes of his face into something ancient and grim. The brief, charged moment from before was gone, replaced by the cold pragmatism of a soldier. "But they've made a mistake." "What mistake?" "Now I know they're here." He picked up the landline phone again. This time he dialed a different number. "Marcus, it's Doc. They're in town. They just tried to torch my garage." A pause. "Yeah, the perimeter just got smaller. I need eyes. Let me know if you see anything." He hung up. Elena watched him, this network of unseen allies clicking into place. "You have your own army," she said, the realization dawning on her. "I have brothers," he corrected, his tone sharp. "There's a difference. An army follows orders. Brothers make a choice." The choice was made quickly. Within 20 minutes, the rumble of a single motorcycle echoed outside. Daniel went down to meet him. Elena watched from the window as he spoke with a large, bearded man in a cut-off denim vest. No handshakes, just a series of grim nods. The biker handed Daniel a long, heavy object wrapped in an oil-stained cloth. Daniel took it, nodded once more, and the biker rode off into the night. He came back upstairs, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a pump-action shotgun, its metal gleaming with a recent cleaning. "Oh, God," Elena breathed, her stomach clenching. "It's for the door," he said, his voice matter-of-fact as he checked the action. "If they get past me, this is what you'll hear. You won't have to aim. Just point it at the center of the doorway and pull the trigger." He leaned it against the wall by the sofa, a stark, terrifying monument to their new reality. The night passed in a tense, sleepless vigil. Daniel sat in a chair by the window, a silent sentinel. Elena lay on the sofa, watching his silhouette, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She thought of David, her husband. He'd been all flash and charm, promises that evaporated like mist. He'd never made her feel safe. He'd only ever made her feel nervous. This man, this violent, silent fortress of a man, made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Protected. It was a terrifying kind of safety, but it was real. Just before dawn, the phone rang, making them both jump. Daniel answered on the first ring. "Yeah." Marcus's voice was a low growl. "Found them. 2 cars. They're holed up at the old Miller grain silo on the west edge of town. 6, maybe 7 men. They look settled in for the day." "Good," Daniel said. "That's good. Stand down. This is mine now." "You sure, Doc? We can be a thundercloud 5 minutes out." "I'm sure. This ends with me and Falco. Anyone else is just noise." He hung up and looked at Elena. The first gray light of morning was filtering through the blinds, illuminating the resolve on his face. "It's time." "Time for what?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "To end this. I'm going to the silo." "Alone?" "Daniel, that's suicide. There are 7 of them." "A cornered rat is more dangerous than 7, he said, a grim, almost smile touching his lips. It was the ghost of the smile from the photograph. "They're in a defensive position. They're scared, and scared men make mistakes." He stood and walked to the metal cabinet. This time he took out the Colt 1911, checking the magazine and racking the slide with a definitive clack before tucking it into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back. He was going to war, and he was going alone. Elena rushed to him, grabbing his arm. "Please, don't. There has to be another way. We can run. We can take Lucy and just disappear." He placed his hand over hers, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Running is what I've been doing for 10 years, Elena. It doesn't work. The past always finds you." His eyes, those cold, flinty eyes, softened just a fraction. "I made you a promise. I'm going to keep it." He was doing this for her, for Lucy. The knowledge was a weight that settled deep in her soul. "Then I'm coming with you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "No." The word was absolute, a stone wall. "I can drive the getaway car. I can be a lookout, something. I can't just sit here and wait to find out if you're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You have to," he said, his voice dropping. "You have to be here for Lucy. She needs her mother. That's your job. This," he gestured to the gun, to himself, "is mine." He turned to leave, but she held fast, her fingers tightening on his arm. She pulled him around to face her. There were tears in her eyes, but her gaze was fierce. "You come back, Daniel Miller. You hear me? You come back." She stood on her toes, and this time she didn't kiss his cheek. She found his lips. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, a kiss of fear and hope, and a raw, undeniable need. A transfer of life from her to him, a plea for him to remember what he was fighting for. For a single, heart-stopping moment, he yielded. His hands came up to cradle her face, his lips moving against hers with a shocking, pent-up hunger. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving in the desert, finally tasting water. It was full of everything he'd denied himself for a decade: passion, connection, a reason to live beyond mere survival. Then, just as suddenly, he broke away, his breath ragged. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Elena." It was a groan, a prayer, a curse. Then he was gone, pulling away and striding out the door without a backward glance. The click of the lock was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She stood there, in the sudden, crushing silence of the apartment, her lips still burning from his kiss. The taste of him, whiskey and winter air lingering on her tongue. The shotgun stood by the door, a silent sentinel. And upstairs, her daughter slept, innocent of the war her protector had just walked into. The wait began, and it was agony. Daniel drove his truck to within a mile of the silos, parking it behind a derelict barn and continuing on foot through the dew-soaked fields. The morning was cold and still, the only sound the cawing of crows. He moved like a ghost, using the terrain for cover, his senses hyper-alert. He was back in his element. This was the dance he knew. The grain silo complex was a skeleton of rusted metal and decaying concrete. He spotted the two cars immediately, parked haphazardly inside the main storage building, its huge sliding door partially open. He circled, finding a vantage point on a catwalk that ran along the upper level of the adjacent structure. He counted 6 men. They were clustered around a small camp stove, drinking coffee. They looked jumpy, their hands never far from their weapons. They were waiting for nightfall, waiting for orders to bring the war to his doorstep. Daniel's plan was simple: create chaos, isolate and eliminate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy ball bearing. He took aim at a stack of rusted metal drums on the far side of the vast, echoing space. He threw it. The clang was deafening, the sound ricocheting off the corrugated steel walls like a gunshot. The men below scrambled, shouting, grabbing their guns, their heads whipping towards the source of the noise. That was their mistake. While their attention was diverted, Daniel moved. He dropped silently from the catwalk, landing softly in the shadows behind a pile of rotting grain sacks. 2 of the men had broken from the group, advancing cautiously towards the fallen drums. Daniel let them pass. He focused on the 4 remaining by the cars. He drew the Colt. The first shot was a thunderclap in the confined space. It took the nearest man in the thigh, spinning him to the ground with a scream. Chaos erupted. The 2 men who had wandered off spun around, firing wildly into the shadows. Daniel was already moving, a phantom in the gloom. He fired twice more, not to kill, but to disable. A shot shattered the elbow of one man, his pistol clattering to the concrete. Another round punched into the engine block of one of the cars, sending a spray of coolant and steam into the air. He wasn't trying to kill them all. He was trying to break them, to show them the futility of their mission. "It's him," one of them screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "It's Doc." The name alone was a weapon. Their return fire became frantic, undisciplined. Bullets whined off metal, punching holes in the walls. Daniel used the noise and confusion, flanking them, herding them like frightened sheep. He emerged from the shadows behind the 2 men who had been by the cars. One of them, a kid no older than 20, saw him and froze, his eyes wide with terror. Daniel didn't shoot. He just looked at him, his gaze an abyss. "Drop it," Daniel said, his voice calm amidst the storm. "And you live." The kid's pistol clattered to the floor. The other man, older, more hardened, spun around, raising his weapon. Daniel was faster. The Colt barked once. The man grunted, clutching his shoulder, his gun skittering away. Silence descended, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the hiss of the car's ruptured radiator. 3 men were down and out. The other 3, including the one with the shattered elbow, stood frozen, their will to fight utterly broken. Daniel stood amidst them, smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol. He wasn't even breathing hard. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "You go back to Falco. You tell him the debt is paid, in blood. You tell him that the woman, Elena, and her daughter are under the protection of the man they called Doc. And if he ever looks in their direction again, I will not be sending a message. I will be paying him a personal visit. Do you understand?" They nodded, frantic, pathetic. "Now get your friends," Daniel commanded, "and get out of my town." He watched as they scrambled, dragging their wounded to the one functional car, their bravado completely shattered. They peeled out of the silo, leaving a cloud of dust and the stink of fear behind. Daniel stood alone in the vast, empty space, the adrenaline slowly receding. It was over, for now. He had drawn his line not in the sand, but in the blood and broken bones of Falco's men. He had become the legend again, fully and completely, to protect the one fragile, beautiful thing that had stumbled into his life. He holstered the Colt and turned to walk back through the fields, back to the woman whose kiss still burned on his lips, back to the life he had just fought a war to keep. The walk back through the fields felt different. The weight of the Colt against his spine was familiar, but the ghost of Elena's kiss was a new, disorienting gravity. He had gone out as Doc, the avenging angel of his own bloody mythology. But he was returning as Daniel, the man who had been kissed like he was worth saving. The two identities warred within him, a civil war fought with every step he took towards her. He found her not in the apartment, but downstairs in the garage. She was on her knees, scrubbing at the gasoline stain on the asphalt in front of the bay door with a stiff brush and a bucket of soapy water. Her shoulders were shaking, but not from tears, from raw, furious effort. She was attacking the stain, the memory, the fear, with a ferocity that took his breath away. She heard his footsteps and froze, the brush clattering into the bucket. She spun around on her knees, her eyes wide, searching him for blood, for wounds. He stood there, whole, the morning sun at his back, framing him in light. "You're back," she whispered, the words a shaky exhalation of relief. "It's done," he said, his voice rough from the morning's work. She scrambled to her feet, not caring about the wet patches on her knees. She just stared at him, this man who smelled of cordite and damp earth. The man who had walked into hell and walked back out for her. Without a word, she crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his leather jacket. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. The finality in his voice was enough. He was here. He was alive. Daniel stood rigid for a moment, his arms at his sides. The feel of her, warm and solid and alive against him, was a shock to his system more profound than any gunshot. Slowly, hesitantly, as if handling something infinitely fragile, he brought his arms up and wrapped them around her. He buried his face in her hair and just breathed her in, the scent of soap and her shampoo washing away the last of the silo's stench. It was Lucy's voice, bright and unburdened, that broke the spell. "Mama! Daniel! I'm hungry!" They broke apart, a flush rising on Elena's cheeks. Daniel cleared his throat, the moment of raw vulnerability receding behind his usual guarded expression, but his eyes remained soft on her. "Right," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Breakfast." What followed was the most surreal and beautiful morning of Elena's life. Daniel, the man who had just dismantled a small army, stood at his small stove, meticulously making pancakes. He flipped them with a quiet focus, while Lucy chattered away at the small table, drawing pictures of the three of them with a broken spark, Plug as a hero. Elena watched them, her heart aching with a hope so sharp it felt like fear. This was a mirage, a beautiful dream built on a foundation of violence. She knew it couldn't last. A man like Jimmy Falco didn't just accept a defeat. He nursed it, let it fester, and then he retaliated. Her fears were confirmed an hour later. Daniel's landline rang. He answered, and the brief, easy lightness that had been in his face vanished, replaced by a grim coldness. "Paul," he said. Elena couldn't hear the words, but she saw Daniel's knuckles whiten as he gripped the receiver. He listened for a long time, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall, seeing something far away. "Understood," he finally said, and hung up. He turned to her. The peace of the morning was gone, shattered by a single phone call. "Falco," Daniel said, the name a curse. "He's not backing down. He's calling it a declaration of war. He's pulling in favors, hiring outside talent, professionals." The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. Professionals, not thugs, not enforcers, men like Daniel. "He's coming himself," Daniel continued, his voice flat. "Tonight, he's bringing his whole crew. He wants to make an example. Of me, of you, of this whole damn town." Elena felt the world tilt. What do we do? Daniel's eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw no fear, only a final, terrible resolve. We don't run. We can't. He'd just hunt us. This ends tonight, one way or another. He spent the day preparing. It was a chilling, methodical process. He sent Elena and Lucy to the diner under the watchful eye of Marcus, who sat in a corner booth, a mountain of quiet menace sipping coffee. With them gone, Daniel worked. He moved through the garage and the apartment like a general fortifying a castle. He moved stock shelves to create choke points. He strung thin, almost invisible wires at ankle height across dark doorways. He placed the shotgun by the top of the stairs. He checked and rechecked the Colt. This wasn't a man hoping for the best. This was a man preparing for the worst. When Elena returned with the sleepy Lucy that evening, the air in the apartment was thick with tension. The place felt different, a fortress, a trap. After putting Lucy to bed, Elena came out to find Daniel standing by the window, watching the sunset bleed into night. "Tell me," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Tell me who you were." He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low, the words dragged from a place deep inside he'd kept locked for a decade. "My name is Daniel Korsakov," he said, the name sounding foreign and heavy on his tongue. "They called me the surgeon because I was precise. I was the man the club sent when a problem needed to be cut out, cleanly and permanently. I was loyal. I was feared. I had everything. And then there was a raid. A bad one. Innocent people got caught in the crossfire. A family." He swallowed hard, the memory of physical pain on his face. "I saw the look in a little girl's eyes that day. The same look Lucy had when she came to my garage. It broke something in me. I couldn't be that man anymore. I made a deal. I gave the club everything I had, my loyalty, my silence, in exchange for a new name and a quiet place to die. I became Daniel Miller. I buried the surgeon in an unmarked grave." He finally looked at her, his eyes full of a raw, ancient torment. "But you can't bury something that's still alive, Elena. I dug him up for you." Tears streamed down Elena's face. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. His hand was calloused, strong, and it trembled slightly in her grasp. "You're not a monster, Daniel," she whispered. "A monster wouldn't care. A monster wouldn't have saved us." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a desperate, fervent kiss to her knuckles. It was an answer, a plea, a goodbye. The first sign of their arrival was the sudden, complete silence from the street. The usual distant hum of a late-night car was gone. The world had gone still, holding its breath. Then headlights. Not one or two, but a convoy sliding into view and parking across the street, blocking the road. Car doors opened and closed with solid, ominous thuds. Daniel moved away from the window. "It's time. Remember the plan, the bedroom, the fire escape. Don't come out, no matter what you hear." He looked at her one last time, his gaze etching her face into his memory. Then he turned and walked down the stairs into the garage, closing the door behind him. He left it unlocked. An invitation. Elena hurried into the bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. She crouched by the door, peering through the keyhole, the cold metal of the shotgun lying on the floor beside her. Down in the garage, Daniel stood in the center of the open space, under the single bare bulb. He had shed his jacket. The Colt 1911 was in his hand, held loosely at his side. He was waiting. The main garage door rattled, then began to slide up with a grinding screech. Standing there, silhouetted against the night, was Jimmy Falco. He was a small man in an expensive suit, with the dead eyes of a shark. Flanking him were 6 men. These were different from the silo crew. They moved with a quiet, fluid confidence. They were, as Paul had said, professionals. Falco stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete. He smiled, a thin, bloodless gesture. "So you're the famous Doc," Falco said, his voice a silken whisper. "The ghost. "You don't look like much." Daniel didn't respond. He just watched, his body relaxed but coiled, a spring waiting to be released. "You cost me a lot of money," Falco continued, pacing slowly. "You cost me a lot of face. That's a debt that can't be paid with cash. It has to be paid in blood." He stopped and looked up at the apartment. "I think I'll start with the woman, make you watch, then the girl." That was the trigger. Daniel moved. The first shot came not from Daniel, but from one of Falco's men. Daniel was already diving sideways, the round sparking off the concrete where he'd been standing. He came up firing, 2 quick shots that took down the lead gunman. Chaos erupted. The garage became a thunderous cathedral of gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the dark space in strobing bursts. Daniel was a phantom, using the shelves and the cars he'd positioned as cover, moving constantly. He wasn't just shooting. He was herding them, drawing them into the kill zones he'd prepared. Elena watched, her hand clamped over her mouth to keep from screaming. She saw one of the men trip over Daniel's wire, stumbling forward into the path of a perfectly placed shot. She saw Daniel use a stack of tires to deflect fire, popping up in an unexpected place to take down another. He was breathtaking and terrifying. The surgeon was indeed at work, cutting, precise, and utterly merciless. But they were too many, too good. A shot grazed Daniel's arm, another burned a path across his ribs. He grunted in pain but didn't slow down. Falco, seeing his men falling, began to back towards the door, his courage failing him. Daniel saw him trying to flee. With a roar, he broke from his cover, charging through the hail of gunfire towards Falco. It was a suicide run. "No!" Elena screamed, the word tearing from her throat. 2 of Falco's men stepped into his path. Daniel fired twice and they fell, but it gave Falco the time he needed. The small man scrambled out into the night. Daniel stood in the center of the garage, chest heaving, blood soaking his shirt. Only one of Falco's men was left, raising his weapon for a final point-blank shot. From the top of the stairs, a blast echoed, deafening in the enclosed space. The last man was thrown backward as if hit by a truck. Elena stood at the top of the stairs, the shotgun smoking in her hands, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a ferocious light. Daniel stared at her in shock. The sound of the shotgun blast was still ringing in their ears when a new sound filled the night outside. The roaring thunder of not 1 or 2, but a dozen. 24 motorcycle engines. Headlights flooded the street, pinning Jimmy Falco in their glare as he fumbled with his car door. Marcus and his Cedar Spires chapter had arrived. The perimeter had been breached, and the brothers had come. Daniel didn't wait to watch. He turned and took the stairs 2 at a time. He didn't care about the blood, the pain, the men downstairs. He only saw Elena, standing there, the shotgun now hanging limply in her grip, her body trembling with shock and adrenaline. He reached her and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. "It's over," he whispered into her hair, his own body shaking with the aftermath. "It's really over." She clung to him, sobbing, the violent tension of the last 2 days finally shattering. Down on the street, the war ended not with a shootout, but with a quiet, brutal efficiency. Jimmy Falco, his empire and his life forfeit, was taken for a long, final ride into the desert. Daniel held Elena as the roar of the bikes faded into the distance, leaving behind the peaceful silence of a town that would never know how close it had come to hell. He held her, and for the first time in 10 years, the ghost of the surgeon felt quiet. The man named Daniel had finally found something, someone to live for. The silence after the bikes faded was different this time. It wasn't the tense, waiting silence of before. It was a deep, settling quiet, the kind that comes after a long storm has finally passed. Daniel held Elena at the top of the stairs, his big hand cradling the back of her head, his face buried in her hair. He could feel the frantic beat of her heart against his chest, slowly beginning to steady. "Lucy," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "She's fine," he murmured, his voice a raw scrape. She slept through it. It was a minor miracle, but one he was profoundly grateful for. The last thing that little girl needed was more nightmares. Elena pulled back slightly, her hands coming up to frame his face. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swimming, but her gaze was clear, fierce. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing," he said, but he winced as her fingers gently probed the gash on his arm and the burn across his ribs. "It's not nothing," she insisted, her voice gaining strength. She was shifting from terrified victim to caretaker, and the transformation was a balm to his ragged soul. "Sit. Let me look." She led him to the sofa, pushing him down with a firmness that brooked no argument. He watched her move to the kitchen, her hands only trembling slightly as she filled a bowl with warm water and found a clean cloth. The domesticity of the action, in the midst of the carnage downstairs, was surreal. He sat in silence, letting her tend to him. The cloth was warm and soothing on his skin. She cleaned the blood from his arm with a surprising gentleness, her touch feather-light. Every brush of her fingers was a brand, searing away the memory of violence, replacing it with something tender and new. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on her face. "You, with the shotgun." She paused, her gaze dropping to the floor where the weapon still lay. "He was going to shoot you in the back. I didn't think. I just did it." She looked up at him, a fresh wave of tears welling in her eyes. "I couldn't let him take you from us." From us. The two words hung in the air, a confession and a promise. He reached out, his hand covering hers, stilling its motion. "Elena." The bedroom door creaked open, and a small, sleepy voice called out, "Mama?" Elena was on her feet in an instant, wiping her eyes. "I'm here, baby," Lucy patted out, rubbing her eyes. She saw Daniel sitting on the couch, his shirt off, her mother cleaning his arm. Her little face crumpled in confusion. "Are you hurt, Daniel?" He managed a small, genuine smile for her. "Just a little scratch, sweetheart. Your mama's fixing me right up." Lucy climbed onto the couch next to him, carefully avoiding his injuries, and snuggled against his side. "I had a good dream," she announced sleepily. "We were all at the park." "You pushed me on the swings?" Daniel's throat tightened. He looked over Lucy's head at Elena, who was watching them, her heart in her eyes. This was what he had fought for, this fragile, perfect moment. The cleanup was handled with a discretion that spoke of long practice. Just after dawn, Marcus and two of his brothers returned with a panel van. They asked no questions. They simply went to work downstairs, their movements efficient and silent. Within an hour, the garage was clean. The only evidence of the night's war was the lingering scent of bleach and the repaired garage door. Marcus came upstairs to report. "It's done, Doc. The trash has been taken out. The town will never know." Daniel, now wearing a clean shirt, nodded from his place on the sofa. "I owe you, Marcus." The big biker shook his head. "You don't. We look after our own." His gaze flickered to Elena, who was making coffee in the kitchen, and a small, approving smile touched his lips. "Looks like you finally found something worth staying clean for." He clapped Daniel on his good shoulder and left. The days that followed were a time of slow, quiet healing. Elena and Lucy stayed in the apartment, the unspoken agreement that this was now their home. The fear began to recede, replaced by a tentative, dawning sense of safety. Daniel found himself living in a world of new sensations. The sound of laughter in his home, the smell of something other than motor oil and whiskey, the warmth of a small body trusting him enough to crawl into his lap for a story. One evening, a week after the siege, Elena found him staring at the old photograph on his wall, the one of him as a young, fearless Doc surrounded by his brothers. "Does it call to you?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. "That life?" He was silent for a long moment, studying the ghost of his former self. "No," he said, and the truth of it resonated deep in his bones. "It feels like someone else's life. A story I read once." He turned to her, his gaze clear and certain. "This is my life now. You. Lucy, this town, it's the only one I want." He reached up and took the photograph off the wall. He didn't smash it or burn it. He simply turned it face down and placed it in a drawer. It was a part of his history, but it no longer defined his future. The final step came a few days later. He was under a car in the garage, the familiar weight of a wrench in his hand, when the bell over the door chimed. He rolled out on the creeper to see Deputy Mark standing there, his hat in his hands. "Dan," Mark said, his expression serious. Daniel got to his feet, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mark, I'm not here officially," the deputy began, looking uncomfortable. "But there are rumors about a disturbance last week, about Jimmy Falco disappearing." Daniel said nothing. He just waited. Mark sighed, looking around the clean, orderly garage. "I also heard that Elena and her daughter are living here now, that they're safe." "They are," Daniel said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. Mark met his gaze, and a silent understanding passed between them. The deputy was a good man, but he wasn't a fool. He knew that some monsters couldn't be caged by the law. Sometimes you needed a bigger monster on your side. "Good," Mark said finally, a weight seeming to lift from his shoulders. "That's good. I'm glad they have someone looking out for them." He put his hat back on. "You have a nice day, Dan." As the deputy left, Daniel felt the last shackle of his past fall away. The law had just looked the other way. The town had accepted him. He was no longer Doc, the lurking threat. He was Daniel Miller, the mechanic, the protector, the family man. That night, with Lucy sound asleep, he and Elena sat on the sofa, the sounds of a quiet town drifting through the open window. The space between them was charged, but it was no longer with fear or unsaid danger. It was thick with anticipation, with a longing that had been building since that first desperate kiss. "Daniel," Elena said, turning to face him, "when I picked up that shotgun, I wasn't just saving you. I was saving us. The life I saw for us." He reached out, his thumb stroking the line of her jaw. "What kind of life is that?" "A life with you in it," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "All of you, the quiet mechanic and the man who moves mountains to keep us safe. I love them both." The words, so simple and direct, shattered the last of his defenses. He had been loved for his power, feared for his ruthlessness, but never cherished for the broken, weary man he was underneath. "I love you, Elena," he said, the words feeling foreign and right on his tongue. "I think I have since a little girl with your eyes begged me to be brave." A single happy tear traced a path down her cheek. He leaned in and caught it with his lips, then found her mouth with his. This kiss was nothing like the others. It was not desperate or fierce. It was slow, deep, and full of a profound, aching tenderness. It was a kiss of homecoming, of promises made and a future embraced. Later, tangled together in his bed, their bed, the moon casting silver light through the window, Daniel held her as she slept. Her head was pillowed on his chest, her breath warm against his skin. The scars on his body, old and new, were no longer marks of shame, but badges of the battle he had fought to get here. He looked at the woman in his arms and then towards the room where her daughter slept, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep into his soul, that the Hell's Angel had finally found his heaven. The war was over, and for the first time in his long, violent life, Daniel Korsakov, known as Doc and the Surgeon, was finally, completely at peace. Thank you for joining Daniel and Elena on their intense journey. This proves that sometimes the most dangerous men make the most loyal protectors. What did you think of that final showdown? If this story gripped you, subscribe for more and let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from?